Edward Reeves, 63, and retired from the federal prosecutor's office, knelt in the dark of his home study. He spun the dial with practiced fingers and pulled open the heavy door. The interior, a neat stack of manila envelopes and property deeds. Behind the estate documents, his fingers brushed a slim blue booklet that did not belong there.
This isn't ours. We don't have a second passport.
He opened it anyway. The photograph was Margaret, same smile, same eyes, but the name printed beneath her face was Patricia Reynolds, a name he had never heard.
After 40 years, I don't know who I am married to.
He flipped through the pages. Stamps from Belgrade, Almaty, Dubai.
Every single date lines up with the weeks she told me she was in Phoenix visiting her sister.
He didn't move. The weight of the little blue book in his hands was far heavier than paper. He sat at the desk, clicked on the lamp, and flattened the passport under the magnifying lens.
Every date matched a lie. March 12th, she called from a Phoenix hotel, but the stamp says Belgrade.
The Almaty entry stamp was smudged, printed in haste.
11 trips, 11 lies. I can still hear her voice. Wish you were here. The desert is blooming.
Cold fury settled into his chest, but he would not give it a voice. Not yet. He reached for his phone and photographed every page, his movements precise. He selected David Morrow's name, attached the images, and typed, "David, I need you to look into this. Keep this between us for now." He sent it, then immediately deleted the message from his chat history. He placed both passports inside the safe, Margaret's and the one for Patricia Reynolds, and closed the door. He sat in the dark office, the glow of the laptop screen the only light. The house above him was silent. Margaret was asleep. He typed the name into the search bar. Patricia Reynolds. Nothing. No social media. No news mentions. No professional footprint. He pushed into public records, voter rolls, property deeds, court filings. Zero matches. He accessed the LEAP database with his retired credentials. The system still recognized him. One thin hit. A Patricia Reynolds renewed a passport 5 years ago. Mailing address. A P.O. box in Wilmington. His phone vibrated across the desk. The screen lit up with the name he'd been waiting for. David Morrow.
He picked up. What have you got?
David's voice was tight. We need to talk in person. This is bigger than a fake passport.
Edward's hand tightened on the phone. Where and when?
Later that night, Edward slipped into a vinyl booth at an all-night diner. The place was nearly empty, just a tired waitress and the hum of a neon sign. David Morrow sat across from him, a thin manila folder on the table between them. He slid it toward Edward without a word.
Your wife's alter ego. The passport is clean, issued through a witness protection program, but it's been exploited.
He flipped open the folder. A bank statement showed a wire of $200,000 from a Cyprus account to Patricia Reynolds.
How many of these transfers?
So far, 5 shell companies, all tied to her alias, and one of them, I don't know how to say this, it lists your home address.
My house. They've been using my house as a front.
Gather everything you can quietly. We need more before we take this anywhere official.
Edward nodded slowly. His mind was already at work, the old prosecutor instincts firing.
I'll get you everything. This ends now.
Edward worked through the night, pulling documents from every database his retired credentials would still access. The first shell company traced back to a date 11 months before his wedding.
5 shell companies, and the oldest predates everything. Our marriage, my career, the life I thought I knew.
Another thread led to a law firm in Panama, notorious for creating anonymous entities.
$600,000 wired through Almaty, the exact week she claimed to be in Phoenix.
He mapped 5 entities, each tied to Patricia Reynolds, a web of deception woven across continents.
And now a 6th, opened 3 months ago with a $1.2 million deposit. She's still active.
He printed the chart and drew red lines, each a financial link that traced back to his own home address. His phone pinged. David's message. Got a hit on a known syndicate. We need to talk. Edward stared at the screen, a chill running down his spine. The rabbit hole had just opened into an abyss. 2 hours later, they met in a parked sedan under a dead streetlight, the tension thick as fog.
David handed over a file stamped with the Interpol logo. The Voss Syndicate. They use mules. Your wife is one of them.
He pulled out a grainy photo. A man shaking hands with Patricia Reynolds in Almaty.
That's Carl Voss, enforcer. If she's meeting him, she's not just a courier.
Edward's voice was low. Could she be a victim? Forced into it?
David shook his head. The patterns show voluntary involvement. She's been doing this longer than you've been married.
Flashes of memory. Cash in her nightstand. Her evasive answers, assembled into a guilty collage.
Keep digging, Edward said, his voice hardening. I need to know if she's a kingpin or just a pawn.
David nodded, then added quietly, "This is going to break you, Edward."
It already has.
The next morning, Edward sat across from Margaret at the breakfast table, the newspaper a shield between him and the woman he no longer knew.
You should have seen book club last night. Someone threw a scone. It was absolutely ridiculous.
She lies as easily as she breathes. I've shared a bed with a stranger for 40 years.
He excused himself with a murmured word about work, retreating to the safety of his office. He pulled up financial archives, the screen's cold glow falling on the framed photograph of their younger selves from his prosecutor swearing in. A tuition payment from Patricia Reynolds to Margaret's graduate school surfaced, dated 2 years before they ever met.
The source was a shell in the Caymans. She was recruited long before I ever knew her.
Downstairs, Margaret's laugh floated up the stairs, a practiced melody as she chatted on the phone with her sister.
I can't confront her yet. If the syndicate is watching, moving now would tip them off.
He began printing every record, building a dossier that would dismantle the life she had built on a foundation of lies. He pulled each warm page from the printer and snapped them into a thick binder, separating sections with labeled tabs. Then came the passport stamped copies, the flight records, the shell company registrations, every lie documented. He slid the Interpol report into the final section, the grainy photo of Carl Voss staring up like an accusation.
Every museum gala, every overseas conference. She didn't curate art. She curated alibis.
He typed the summary in the voice of a prosecutor, a cold, factual narrative that made the case airtight. His hands trembled only once, when he stapled the cover page stamped with the single word, confidential.
40 years of marriage, and I am drafting an indictment against my own wife.
He closed the binder, his reflection staring back from the darkened window, an old man alone in the shell of his life. He slid the binder into a manila envelope, sealed it, and then paused.
This envelope is a weapon. Once I release it, there is no going back.
He drifted into the living room, sinking onto the sofa, where an old photo album lay open. He turned to their courthouse wedding. Young Margaret gazed up at him with what he'd always believed was love.
Think of the security, Edward. That was her voice, urging me to become a federal prosecutor.
But the security was never for him. It was for Patricia Reynolds, the phantom she'd been since before they met. He slammed the album shut. The sound cracked through the silence like a door bolted forever.
My entire career, the respect, the reputation, she weaponized it to shield her crimes.
He retrieved the dossier from his office and set it on the coffee table, 40 years reduced to a sealed envelope. He picked up his phone and dialed the number David had given him for the U.S. Attorney's Office.
Once I speak, there's no undoing it. But silence is no longer an option.
A calm voice answered on the second ring. Department of Justice. How may I direct your call? The following morning, Edward Reeves walked through the towering doors of the federal building, the sealed dossier clutched to his side. Sarah Lynn met him in a quiet conference room, her gaze direct and unreadable. He set the envelope on the polished table and took a steadying breath.
My wife is Margaret Reeves. She also goes by Patricia Reynolds.
Sarah opened the dossier and began reading, her professional mask slipping. She halted at the Interpol photo, then excused herself and returned with a grim-faced senior official.
Mr. Reeves, this is far more serious than we anticipated. The Patricia Reynolds alias is linked to a terrorist financing network that spans 3 continents.
The words landed like a punch. Edward's hands went cold on the armrests.
We need your full cooperation. Will you help us bring her down?
Yes, whatever it takes.
Sarah opened a file and spread a tactical map across the table, circling the airport with a marker.
She flies out day after tomorrow. Phoenix. She always packs light, 1 carry-on, no checked luggage.
That fits a mule profile. Light footprint, nothing to slow her down through customs.
They settled on the security gate, quiet, controlled, far from the crowds.
You'll drive her to the airport as always. Don't deviate from routine. And no heroics.
A strange relief settled in his chest. The lies would finally end.
He signed the witness agreement, his hand steady, though something inside him trembled.
As he rose to leave, Sarah placed a firm hand on his shoulder. You are doing the right thing, Mr. Reeves.
He nodded, not trusting his voice, and walked out of the room. The plan was set. 40 years of lies would come to an end at a security checkpoint. The house smelled of rosemary and garlic. Margaret's travel bag lay open near the stairs.
She kissed his cheek. You look tired. How was your day?
Just some old case files, he said, hanging his coat. Nothing important.
I am all packed. I can't wait to see my sister. The weather in Phoenix is perfect this time of year.
He forced a smile. The image of her shaking hands with Carl Voss burned in his mind. He helped her choose a light jacket. His hands did not shake. Over dinner, she talked about a new gallery exhibit, her voice animated.
Edward nodded, eating without tasting, as she performed her art historian role.
After the meal, she stood and rehearsed a presentation, her tone professional and bright. Edward excused himself, retreated to his office, picked up the framed wedding photo, and sat counting the hours. That night, Edward lay beside her, the moon casting prison bar shadows across the sheets. Margaret breathed softly beside him, her face peaceful, the picture of innocence.
She looked at me like that when she urged me to become a prosecutor. Think of the security, Edward.
He understood now. She never wanted security for them, just a legal shield for Patricia Reynolds.
But the shield she built is the very weapon that will destroy her.
He slipped out of bed, padded to his office, and checked the dossier one last time. Every page was in order. The case was airtight, 40 years of evidence reduced to a few ounces of paper. He returned to bed, not sleeping, just watching the clock. At 5 a.m., he rose, his movements mechanical. The day had come. The kitchen was bright and ordinary. Over coffee, Margaret unfolded a printout of her Phoenix itinerary.
First, the botanical garden. Then lunch with my sister at that little bistro on Camelback.
Edward's coffee had long gone cold. He watched her trace the schedule with a finger. Her smile practiced. He lifted her carry-on, his fingers grazing hers, and set the strap on her shoulder. In the car, she hummed along to the radio, filling the silence he couldn't break. He parked and walked her to the security line. Each step, a countdown he felt in his bones.
She hugged him, her lips near his ear. I'll call when I land.
I am sure you will, he said, the double meaning hidden in a gentle tone.
He stepped back, pulled out his phone, and texted David, "She's in line. Your turn." Then he moved behind a pillar, his heart hammering, watching her blend into the congregation of travelers. Margaret laid her bag on the conveyor. 2 figures in plainclothes appeared at her side, badges raised. They guided her aside with practiced speed, her face cycling from confusion to fear. A female agent's voice cut the hum of the terminal, reciting Miranda rights with cold clarity. Edward's body locked. He was no longer a husband. just a man watching a case close. Margaret's frantic search passed over him, then her gaze snapped back. The shock dissolved into a piercing, bitter understanding. Her lips formed a silent shape, something between a curse and his name. The agents pulled her arms behind her back. The metal cuffs snapped shut with a final click.
Edward's face was stone, but something dark and satisfied curled in his chest.
40 years of lies, now bound in stainless steel. As the agents steered her past the pillar, she halted mid-step, her eyes drilling into Edward's with a fury that was pure, undiluted hate.
You were always too clever for your own good.
He said nothing, just met the fury with a hollow stare that gave her nothing.
I should have known you'd be my undoing.
An agent's hand pressed her forward. She stumbled, the composed curator now a struggling prisoner. Edward watched her figure shrink down the long corridor, swallowed by the terminal's harsh fluorescent glare. He unclenched his fists, suddenly aware of the ache in his knuckles from the tension.
It is done. The verdict I never wanted to write, but the only one my conscience would allow.
He turned and walked out, his steps heavy on the polished floor, carrying the weight of 40 years. He did not look back. Near the information desk, Sarah Lynn fell into step beside him, a slim leather folder tucked beneath her arm.
She's being processed. The evidence you gave us is damning.
She handed him a pen. He signed the witness form, but the letters of his name held a tremor he couldn't suppress.
The case will be airtight. You've done your country a service.
It doesn't feel like service.
It never does. She nodded, a flicker of genuine understanding crossing her face.
He pushed through the glass doors and into a morning that felt obscenely bright. Travelers hugged and laughed around him. A theater of reunion he no longer understood. He climbed into the old Toyota Tacoma and drove, the engine's hum, the only voice he could tolerate. The world outside the windshield was unchanged. Everything inside the cab was shattered. He unlocked the front door, and the silence greeted him like an accusation. He passed through the kitchen. Her coffee mug sat on the counter, a pale ring still visible inside. He ignored the wine they'd shared and poured himself a glass of water, his hands steady, but his mind raw. The office door stood open. The wall safe yawned empty, its heavy door ajar since the night he'd first found the passports. He crouched and looked inside. Nothing. Both passports were with the DOJ now. He sat heavily at his desk, the weight of 40 years pressing on his chest like a stone slab.
She nudged me toward this career, thinking it would shield her. Instead, it gave me every tool to tear her world apart.
The irony was a blade that cut both ways. Her greatest manipulation had created her undoing. He didn't cry, but his eyes burned, tears that refused to fall. The house felt like a mausoleum now, every corner haunted by a memory that had never been real. Edward clicked on the television. The late news bathed the room in cold blue light. The anchor's voice was steady. A major arrest today at the airport, linked to terrorist financing. Grainy footage showed a woman ducking her head, but the auburn hair was unmistakable. Edward watched, stone-faced, as the anchor cited a long-running investigation. He killed the screen. The silence that rushed back was heavier than before. He lifted Margaret's framed photograph from the mantel and stared at the smile that had fooled him for decades. Then he laid it face down on the shelf. He went to the bedroom and pulled open the nightstand drawer. From a small leather box, he extracted the gold wedding band. He set it on the dresser, the finality settling like a cold stone in his chest. He rose with the first light, his sleep fractured and thin, the house already feeling emptied out. He opened her closet. The clothes still held a ghost of her perfume, a scent that now felt like a lie. He folded each piece slowly, laying them into donation boxes as if performing a burial. He emptied her desk drawer, feeding old papers into the shredder, the whirring motor, a hollow eulogy. Behind a false bottom, he found a tiny USB drive. He pocketed it for the DOJ. In the home office, He crouched before the wall safe and pushed the heavy door shut. He spun the dial, the internal clicks counting down what felt like a final heartbeat. He stood and surveyed the room. The space was stripped of her presence, but the silence still rang. A single brass key lay on the desk, the safe key, an artifact of trust turned to ash. He lifted it and slipped it into his pocket, a small weight that anchored him to a life he was finally choosing to reclaim. He carried a mug of black coffee to the back porch and sat down, the morning sun already warm. The garden she had planted years ago was blooming, a cruel splash of color. His phone buzzed. David's message, "Indictment is in. She'll do 25 years. He typed back, "Thank you. No more." A bird landed on the fence, perched for a heartbeat, then launched into the pale sky.
He thought of the man he used to be. Naive, trusting, in love with a fiction.
Now he was wise, but that wisdom was a weight he felt pressing down into his bones. He rose slowly, feeling every one of his 63 years, and walked back inside. The wooden screen door clicked shut behind him, a soft sound that echoed with finality. The house settled around him, quiet but no longer hostile, just empty and slowly becoming his. He walked to the office window and watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and ash. He unlocked the shallow drawer where his old prosecutor's badge rested on a bed of felt. He placed the brass safe key beside the badge, two symbols of a life he had finally reclaimed.
She thought she was using me, but in the end, I was exactly what I seemed, a man of the law.
He pushed the drawer shut, the soft click sounding like the closing of a heavy book. The room darkened, but he didn't turn on the lamp. Letting the shadows pull him into their quiet, he sat motionless, the lengthening shadows draping him like a mantle of weary peace. A faint, sad smile touched his lips, the expression of a man who had lost everything and found his own soul in the ruins. Outside, beyond the glass, the world kept turning, but for Edward Reeves, a long and brutal chapter had finally, irrevocably closed.